Okay, you guys, this shit goes real deep. Get ready. I think I figured out what Kane Pixel's Backrooms is actually about, what it represents metaphorically, and why he's so good at capturing a vibe that feels so familiar yet so alien at the same time.
And I got a paper trail to prove it. Check this out.
Tell me something. How the hell did a 12-year-old know how to so perfectly recreate what life was like growing up in the 90s in San Jose, California?
I've stumbled onto a major company conspiracy, Mac. How about that for stress?
You know, it is just truly remarkable what these 9-year-olds are out there creating nowadays. Okay, to be honest, I can't play this stupid character for much longer. We'll just move on from that. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a few different key pieces of evidence here to solve this case.
Take a look at this.
Jesus Christ,
That right there.
First, there's the voiceover from the teaser trailer. The more it remembers something, the less it does. Next, there's the layout of the backrooms themselves. Then we have Kane's entity. And finally, we have Async and the company's researchers that venture into the backrooms. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I believe that all of these clues lead us to one single explanation. The backrooms are someone's mind experiencing dementia. Memory. First of all, we have this fantastic line from the teaser trailer.
And the more times it remembers something, the less it does.
I really think that this is one of the biggest clues in the whole thing. There's two components to this. First, there's the general how memory works part. I remember a long time ago, like learning about, how each time you recall a memory, that the memory is like deteriorating, right? It's a game of telephone that your brain is playing with itself. Every time you remember something, your brain is remembering the last time you remembered it. It's not recalling the original save file, if you will. So obviously that shit's gonna be unrecognizable over time. Then there's the metaphorical side of things. This one's the real doozy, if you ask me. Now tell me something. What kind of mind would have its memory deteriorate the more it was remembering something? Well, I will tell you, a demented one. I'm pretty sure that's the right way to say that, but it just kind of sounds like an insult. A mind with dementia is what I'm trying to say, basically. A mind with dementia. Backroom structure. Then we have the structure and layout of the backrooms itself. This winding labyrinth of meaninglessly connected rooms filled with equally meaningless shit. No friendly faces, no people at all really. It lacks any sort of logic. The rooms are unusual sizes with bizarre layouts, and it just feels so inhuman, for lack of a better word. So it made me think, what could a structure like that represent? And I came right back to that same idea of dementia. If you think of a functioning mind as a building, with logically laid out rooms and memories connecting together to form a person, an identity, a worldview, built over time as someone grows up and learns more about the world, accumulates more experiences. Well, then the opposite of that, metaphorically, is again a mind failing. And titties. All right, think about it. When someone ages and is unfortunate enough to be tortured by dementia, what do they experience more than anything else? Fear. I imagine Kane's entity as a personified version of the fear that someone with dementia feels. The unrecognizable faces that they see everywhere they look, whether it be doctors or family or friends or just strangers in general. They're all the same to them once they get far enough along. I imagine, especially for folks with pretty advanced dementia, they must feel like they're in this perpetual horror movie. And we come back to, how do these entities fit back within the story, within this theory, within the metaphor? And whether it's the bacteria monster or still life, the only two we've seen from Kane so far, these are just the fears of these folks personified. They're the unrecognizable shapes of the people that they once knew, locked inside their mind, deteriorating over time. Async. Now, this one's a bit tougher, I admit. I do have a theory that I think could work for async, but you'll have to let me know, if I'm grasping at straws here. What a weird expression that is. Grasping at straws. The way I've been trying to fit async into the puzzle here is to see them as the care centers, the hospitals, the doctors, the researchers that Alzheimer's or dementia patients are housed in / treated by. I imagine that the research institute is, well, just that. A research institute studying someone with dementia, treating them. They send in their researchers into the mind of the patient through the, portal, mapping out their brain, studying it. Now, I do recognize that there's a few holes in my theory here, especially when it comes to the async side of things. Like, metaphorically speaking, I'm not exactly sure how you explain the whole A-space experiment.
Here at Async, we believe we have found the solution.
Could you say that it's supposed to be some kind of brain enhancement to the patient, or maybe some kind of memory hack? I don't know. To be honest, I have no fucking clue, but like I said, there's definitely a few holes in my explanation here. I'm hoping some of you can help me fill them. Little side note, I love that Kane's stories stay true to the time period that they're set in. Like, nowadays, we're all well aware that population collapse has already begun in most of the industrialized world. Almost all of it. But back in the day, there was a book that came out about the whole population bomb thing, and it spooked people into believing that the population would continue to grow exponentially and we wouldn't be able to feed and house that many people, etc. And it's funny, I was even having this conversation with my mom a little while ago, and she mentioned that, oh, well, aren't we overpopulated? And I was like, no, not even close. We're going to experience total population collapse, and we're going to have to find a new economic model and all kinds of crazy shit like that. But a video for another day, I think. But yeah, it is just crazy how that idea is still in the cultural zeitgeist for everybody. But I do appreciate that in this story, set in the 80s, set in the 90s, Async is trying to solve a problem that back then they very much thought was the most pressing issue, right? So it's very well done. He's so good at slotting in these story elements and these motivations and these plot points into the era that he's writing it all into. And then we have the nostalgia component. Okay, so we have these oddly familiar liminal spaces. We have the 80s and the 90s era it's set in, the costumes and the set dressing to go along with that. We have the technology of the time like VHS and CRT TVs, etc. It seems like all these nostalgic elements serve a similar purpose to the other pieces of our little theory here. When it comes to the dementia patient, it would make sense that there's these places in the backrooms that represent a time and a place from their past, something that they would have known or experienced as a kid, or at least as a younger person, especially when you bring the whole warped, illogical versions of these nostalgic places caused by the dementia. Another side note, using this time period that his audience has such nostalgia for, I think is a huge part of why Kane's version of the Backrooms, goes so fucking hard for people our age. It's like a simpler time that most of us remember, maybe not everybody, where there was no infinite scrolling brain rot, right? And it makes me think that first teaser trailer, it starts off on one representation of the room, clearly looks like the real world. And we slowly start scrolling down, right? And as it goes, it's like he talks about, the more it remembers something, the less it does. And it's almost reminded me of being on social media, on YouTube Shorts or Instagram. And every time you're remembering less and less of what you're seeing as it scrolls by. And it's so meaningless. And it just makes me think of brain rot. You see how that first teaser trailer scrolls up each time, and each time it gets weirder and weirder until we're eventually full blown in the Backrooms. And that really brings me to that same idea. It's just the brain rot of it all. The endless scrolling. It does seem like that was pretty well represented in that first teaser trailer, which was pretty cool. We all just remember it as a simpler time with simpler rules, I think. That time period element of the Backrooms really draws us in the first place, and then it gets us to stay with the fucking brilliant atmosphere and the vibe. And then of course the final hook in you is that story that's just so good, just balls deep in you, and you end up catching feelings. That brings us to the Kenopsia side of things. If you're anything like me, you had no fucking clue what this word meant until now. Well, allow me to enlighten you with information that is not incredibly useful, except in this very specific instance. Kenopsia is defined as the haunting quality of seeing a location that you're familiar with, typically full of people in a state of emptiness or abandonment. First of all, I love that there's a word for that. Long before liminal horror was a thing, I think we all had those moments where you pass by a playground at night or an empty mall after it's closed after you get out of a movie or something like that. And you're just like, ooh, that's eerie. And it's maybe we didn't necessarily know why it had such a vibe, but we did know that there was one nonetheless. Honestly, dude, the coolest part about all this, I think, is that Kane found a way to take, an entire generation, especially Gen Z, right? Much like himself, and, you know, who have never had any actual memories in these spaces during these moments in history, and found a way to make them feel like they'd been there before. And it makes me think of how well he captured, like, you know, being from where I also grew up, the vibe of like a San Jose DMV, which is like straight out of the 70s. You know, at the end of the day, I believe it comes down to one single culprit for why this shit works so well. It's not a single piece of the whole. It's not the async stuff or the entities. It's not the setting or the time it takes place in. It's not the VHS aesthetics or anything like that. It's those places from our collective childhoods, places occupied by happy memories or even just people we knew or even loved, and removing all that is good from them, taking away those people, taking away the life from them, even removing the logic from those spaces. That single idea right there, that is what made me realize that Kane's Backrooms series is just a metaphor for the suffering of a person forgetting who they are, forgetting the people and the places that they know and love. What happens when no part of you is left? What would that look like metaphorically? Well, empty rooms that lack any logic, haunted by things that are unrecognizable and terrifying. And that, my friends, is the end. Thank you for watching. Oh, real quick, before you go, there's a little button down there and a little thumbs up and a little subscribe button. I would love if you gently press both of those buttons. That would be huge. That would be very nice for me. I'd really appreciate it. It's a very simple social contract. You click the button and more shit like this appears in your YouTube app. So yeah, please sub and like if you thought this was entertaining or you found any value in it. If you disliked the video, make sure to dislike it. Thank you, my friends, for tuning in and staying to the end. I know your time is valuable, so I appreciate you spending it here with me, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.